Imagine these 12 British cities see flashpoints of unrest in a single week. Not full-scale insurrection, but enough smashed windows. Running battles and standoffs to send thousands of officers racing from one edge of the country to the other. Police chiefs quietly admit they're running on reserves, not strategy. Councils are drafting late-night emails. Parents are telling their kids, do not hang around the town center tonight. And in the middle of that atmosphere, the king finally appears on screen and tells the nation, to be nice to each other. You don't need to be a Republican to feel that mismatch. On paper, it sounds reassuring. A monarch, urging calm, unity, shared values. It's the kind of thing that used to be treated as a big moment. The Queen's address after a tragedy, after a terror attack, after a national shock. A sense that the country had paused, gathered itself, and taken a breath together. But this time, that's not how it landed. Because by the time the king spoke, Britain was already exhausted. We're talking about a country that's just come through a decade of austerity. Brexit, years of political chaos, a pandemic, Partygate, the trust mini budget, spiraling bills, and now rolling protests that bleed into disorder. People aren't shocked anymore. They're tired. They don't wake up wondering if something will kick off. They half expect that it will. So when the palace finally releases a carefully scripted statement calling for mutual respect, too many people are hearing something else entirely. We see the smoke, but let's talk about vibes. And that raises a brutal question. In 2025 Britain, does a royal message still move the needle at all? To answer that, you have to be honest about how the country has changed. For most of Elizabeth II's reign, the monarchy functioned as a kind of emotional ballast. Whatever you thought about the institution, her presence was predictable. She didn't wade into party politics. She didn't improvise. She didn't react to every social media storm. When she spoke during a crisis, it felt rare and therefore weighty. The symbolism worked because the country still half believed in it. Now look at the environment Charles has inherited. A hyper-online Britain where every speech is instantly clipped, memmed, mocked, fact-checked, and fed back to you on your For You page. A media ecosystem where people are less likely to watch a broadcast in full and more likely to see a 15-second snippet with a sarcastic caption. A political climate where trust in institutions is already scraping the floor. That old reservoir of quiet deference has evaporated. So when the king appears, days into a wave of unrest, and delivers gentle phrases about community spirit, a lot of viewers don't feel soothed. They feel like they being read a polite script from somebody who doesn't have to travel home on the last bus when the high street is tense. The gap isn't just political, it's experiential. And yet, let's be clear, it's not really the monarch people are waiting on now, is it? Because while the king is speaking in broad moral terms, the real power to affect what happens on those streets sits in Downing Street. And the Home Office, that's where decisions are made about protest rules. Police, overtime, mutual aid between forces, emergency funding, intelligence sharing, and what gets quietly deprioritized because there simply aren't enough officers to do everything at once. That brings us to Keir's. He came into office on one core promise. After the chaos of the last few years, he would bring back a sense of basic stability. Grown-ups in the room. Competence over theater. If you listen to his pitch, it wasn't about inspiring transformation. It was about being boring on purpose, so the country could finally stop lurching from crisis to crisis. So when you get a week where protests on migration and race harden into confrontations, far-right and anti-racist groups are squaring off in the same spaces and police numbers are visibly at full stretch, this should be the textbook moment for that promise to be tested. Not on a party conference stage, not in a manifesto. On the streets. Instead, where people have perceived, rightly or wrongly, as a prime minister behind a lectern, not on the front line. Statements about order being maintained, assurances that plans are in place, talk of operational independence for the police, but very little that feels like direct, hands-on leadership in a moment of strain. And this is where things get uncomfortable for both Number 10 and the palace. Because Britain's problem right now is not just disorder. It's disbelief. Ask people in a Midlands town where shops have been closing early for days, just in case tensions flare, whether a royal appeal to unity makes them feel safer. Ask the beat officers who've been drafted in on back-to-back shifts. working overtime they haven't seen paid correctly in months. Whether they think central government truly grasps the pressure they're under. Ask community workers trying to calm teenagers who VA grown up hearing more about budget cuts than about opportunities. Whether they feel anyone in London is actually listening. You'll hear variations of the same theme. It's not just that institutions are stretched. It's that the reassurance doesn't match the reality. Police leaders have been warning for years that the model is creaking. Not enough officers to meet rising demand. Too many experienced staff leaving. Neighborhood policing hollowed out. Mental health calls eating up time while serious violence and protests spike. Add in multiple public scandals eroding trust from the handling of Sarah Everhard's murder to stop and search disparities. And you've got frontline services squeezed from both sides. Less capacity, less legitimacy. Then layer on top the political decisions that feed the tinderbox. Immigration systems that are visibly not working as promised. Housing shortages that turn every new arrival into a perceived threat. Online disinformation that can turn a local incident into a nationwide flashpoint in hours. Years of cuts to youth services, preventive programs, and local mediation structures that used to spot trouble before it spilled onto main roads. By the time you get to visible clashes and riot police and visors, the state is already late. So when the king talks about the importance of pulling together, he's addressing the symptom. When the government talks about robust policing plans, it's also focusing on the symptom. The deeper illness is a country that has quietly lost faith that its institutions can keep their side of the social contract. There was a time when Britain told itself a very clear story. The monarchy embodied continuity. Parliament embodied democracy. The civil service and police embodied order and competence. You might not like every decision, but the machinery broadly worked, and in a crisis, it could be Look at the mood now. After Iraq, the expenses scandal, Brexit, Grenfell, Windrush, years of grinding public service cuts, and scandal after scandal in policing. That story has frayed. When a senior officer says, "Trust us, we've got this under control," a chunk of the public here. We're doing our best with too little money and too few people. When ministers say, we're balancing the right to protest with the need for order, many here, weary watching the polls and hoping a docent tea blow up on our watch. And when the king says, we share common values, more and more people quietly ask, do we, really? Because that's the other truth politicians and palace courtiers don't like to admit. Britain is not just divided by opinion, it's divided by experience. If you're in a comfortable suburb watching footage of unrest in another city, it's a drama happening over there. If you live on the estate where it's actually kicking off, it's your bus route, your corner shop, your kids walk home. If you sit in Whitehall reading situation reports, everything is an issue to be managed. If you're the shopkeeper watching a rolling protest edge closer every Saturday, it's your livelihood on the line. This isn't just North versus South, or London versus the regions. It's centre versus street. And the gap is widening. When that happens, symbolic reassurance doesn't just fail to comfort, it starts to backfire. It becomes another reminder that those at the top either don't grasp what people are living through, or won't say it out loud. That's why this question of who leads. Britain is no longer a constitutional debate about the monarch versus the prime minister. On paper, nothing has changed. The king reigns, the government rules. In reality, the vacuum is elsewhere. It's between what the public are being told and what they can see with their own eyes. You can feel it in small moments. In a parent in Manchester who shrugs off yet another no cause for alarm press release. Because they've seen 3 weekends of low-level confrontations already. In a council worker in the Northeast who says they've had to juggle community cohesion work, emergency housing, and youth outreach with a team that's half the size it was 10 years ago. And a teacher in Leeds noting that warning signs have been there in their classrooms for months, and only now, with cameras rolling outside, do politicians show interest. None of those stories fit neatly into a royal address or a Downing Street briefing. They're too messy, too local, too uncomfortable. But they're what the national narrative is currently missing. Here's the awkward part for everyone involved. There is no longer a single figure who can steady Britain with a broadcast or a podium appearance. Not the king. Not the prime minister. Not the Met commissioner. Not a celebrity campaigner or a viral influencer. The scale and complexity of the pressures the country is under, economic, social, demographic, technological, are beyond one person's ability to soothe. That doesn't mean leadership doesn't matter. It means the type of leadership people are looking for has changed. What people are craving is less poetry, more plain speaking, less performance of competence, more evidence of it. Not just appeals to calm, but concrete explanations. What is actually being done about police burnout? About the intelligence picture around protests? About the role of social media in whipping up confrontation? About the social conditions that make young men so easy to recruit into street clashes in the first place? Crucially, people want honesty about trade-offs. If the government is going to restrict certain demonstrations, say so clearly and own it. If police forces genuinely don't have the capacity to respond quickly to everything, admit it and explain how priorities are being set. If the palace has to remain within constitutional limits and can't wade into politics, be transparent about what that means for the role of the monarch in moments like this, because a vacuum won't stay empty. If mainstream institutions don't fill it with credible information and clear choices, somebody else will fill it with rumor, rage, and simplistic answers. You can already see that happening. Fringe voices promising easy fixes. If only the government cracked down harder. If only we shut the borders. If only we got rid of the monarchy. The details change depending on your corner of the internet, but the logic is the same. Complex problems, presented as if they have one dramatic solution. That's the real danger of a week like the one Britain has just lived through. Not just the immediate clashes or the overtime bills, but the long, slow erosion of the idea that grown-up politics can handle this. That feeling that nobody is really in charge, that the center can't quite see or hear you, is what drives people away from mainstream politics and into cynicism, or worse. And yes, it's easy to blame them. The palace, the government, the police, the media. But there's a question on the table now that won't go away, and it's the one this channel is putting to you. Who do you actually trust to steady this country? Is it the crown, with all its history but limited real-world power? Is it the government, with all its authority but shrinking credibility? Is it your local leaders, the councillors, the community organizers, the volunteers who show up when things turn ugly faster than any response from Westminster? Or is your honest answer, no one at all? Because if your answer is no one, you're not alone. But that answer has consequences. A nation where most people shrugged and say, they're all useless, is a nation where bad actors have far more room to operate, where outsourcing your trust to conspiracy groups, anonymous accounts, or whichever shouting head best reflects, your anger starts to feel attractive, where the space for sensible, boring, unglamorous, problem-solving shrinks. So here's the challenge, both to Britain's leaders and to all of us watching this unfold. For the king, it means recognizing that the old magic of the royal message doesn't work on its own anymore. If the monarchy wants to remain relevant, it has to understand that symbolic words only land when they revisibly connected to a state that has functioning. Comfort without capacity is just noise. For the government, it means realizing that you can't spreadsheet your way out of a legitimacy crisis. Emergency directives, new powers, and strong statements sound tough. But unless the public can see and feel a difference in how safe and heard they are, the gap will widen. Stability in 2025 is not something you declare. It's something you prove over and over again in how you respond to pressure. And for the rest of us, it means resisting the temptation to give up entirely on the possibility of credible leadership. To question, to criticize. Absolutely. That's the point of democracy. But also to demand better, not just louder. To support the local institutions that still hold, fragile as they are, whether that's your school, your surgery, your community center, or yes, your local police officers when they're actually doing the hard, honest work of keeping people safe. Because if there's one thing this turbulent month has exposed, it's that the people of this country are already doing their part. They are the ones closing their shops early to avoid trouble. They are the ones shepherding teenagers away from hotspots. They are the ones volunteering at food banks and youth clubs to pick up the pieces of policies they never voted for. They are holding more of Britain together than the official speeches ever admit. The question now is whether those at the top, in Buckingham Palace and in Downing Street, are ready to meet that effort with something more than carefully crafted lines and rehearsed gravitas. So I'll leave you with this. When you think about the week Britain has just lived through, when you picture the mounted offices, the boarded-up shop fronts, the nervous glances at the clock as dusk falls, whose voice, if any, would actually make you feel more secure? The kings, the prime ministers, your neighbors, or your own? Let me know in the comments, because your answer to that question says more about the true state of this country than any royal address or government briefing ever will.